organizers of this wonderful conference for inviting me to present my work on the Ghaznavid Qur'ans. Louder, okay. Is this better? Yeah. So as I was entering the US, I was asked if I've ever visited Iran, Iraq, or Syria. I answered rather cautiously that I've been to Homs, Hama, Damascus, Latakia, and Aleppo. I was then asked about the reason behind my visits, to which I answered, school trips. Today, as I'm reminded of those happy memories, I stand here watching Aleppo burn and its people being massacred. Today, I'm reminded that you and I are silent witnesses to the destruction of the world's cultural heritage. And today, as I take part in this conference, the least I can do is tell future historians, yes, we knew, but we were helpless. So the title of my talk today, the Imperial Ghaznavid Qur'ans, a case of collaborative productions. First, before I begin, I'd like to remind you very briefly of the context in which the Imperial Ghaznavid Qur'ans were produced. Oops. Uh-oh. Again. The slides are not moving for some reason.
Go to Escape and then press on Presentation, and then you have the slide presentation.
Well, I could just click on the screen if anything, okay. So in Khurasan, the Ghaznavid sultans built an empire with a radiant and powerful image, aiming to impress the rest of the Eastern Islamic world. They ruled between the end of the 10th century and the second half of the 12th century, and had control over Khurasan for 40 years. When I use the term Khurasan here, I'm following its early Islamic usage, which included all the lands east of western Iran, roughly extending from Gurgan in the southeastern Caspian region to Tukharistan on the upper Oxus, and it may have even stretched to the Indus Valley and Sindh. The Ghaznavid sultans led a luxurious life. They built richly decorated monuments, palaces, mosques, funerary structures, and minarets, from which we only know the remains. They held celebrations at the court in the opulent interiors of the palaces, which were described by the historian Al-Bayhaqi. Ghazna, the capital of the dynasty, was transformed into a great center of culture. Men of letters were hired for the court. Scientists and the finest Persian poets were recruited to write and recite panegyric poems. It is within this splendid court life that the Imperial Ghaznavid Qur'ans were commissioned. Their aesthetic represents a long process of transformations that began a century earlier. In the 10th century, Kufic scripts started being replaced by the new style scripts, or what is called also in the literature Eastern Kufic or broken cursive, and by the round style script, generally called cursive, naskh, or even muhaqqaq. These two newly stylized types of scripts were employed in the Ghaznavid Qur'ans, and so was paper and the vertical format, which came to replace the horizontal format and the use of parchment in the Mashriq. The first Ghaznavid Qur'an that I'd like to show you today was commissioned by Sultan Ibrahim ibn Mas'ud, who ruled between 451 and 492, from which only the 8th volume survives today and is now at the Topkapi Sarai Library. We're looking here at its colophon, which states that Sultan Ibrahim commissioned it. Amara bi kitbatih, its writing was ordered by Al-Amir al-Sayyid al-Malik, a long title, followed by the name of Sultan Ibrahim. The Qur'anic text in this manuscript is accompanied by Persian translation and tafsir, the earliest to survive today, Min Tasnif Abu Nasr Ahmad al-Haddadi, as it appears at the bottom of the first folio in the volume. Al-Haddadi was a religious scholar who lived in Samarkand and died after the year 400. The Qur'an is extraordinary. It was copied in 4 types of scripts, extremely stylized, illustrating the peak of stylization of the new style and the round-style scripts of the period. On the verso of the colophon spread is a crown-like device inscribed with the name of its copyist and the date of its completion, كتبه وذهبه العبد عثمان بن الحسين الوراق الغزنوي في شهور سنة 84 و400, copied and illuminated by the servant Uthman bin al-Hussein al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi during the month of the year 484. There is no mentioning of the place of the origin of the manuscript, but since it was commissioned by Sultan Ibrahim, it is almost certain to have been produced in an important city in the Ghaznavid Empire, most likely the capital Ghazna. In the surviving illuminated double-page frontispiece of this Topkapi volume, at each of the 4 corners of the panel on the left-hand page, an 8-pointed star is inscribed with, reading right to left, top to bottom, Al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi, Ghafar Allahu lahu, the Warraq of Ghazna, may God forgive him. Miraculously, a double-sided illuminated folio appeared in Sotheby's Art of the Islamic World auction sale in London on 20 April 2016 that shares a strikingly similar design to that of the frontispiece in Sultan Ibrahim's Qur'an. Even though it is slightly smaller, the design on the recto of Sotheby's folio is identical to that of the right-hand page of the frontispiece of the Topkapi's volume, decorated with interlaced circles and filled with floral motifs. In addition, the design on the verso of Sotheby's folio matches the design of the left-hand page of the Topkapi's frontispiece, made of lines forming various geometric shapes and decorated with star and chessboard-like patterns. Most importantly, the 4 corners of the verso of Sotheby's folio, 8-pointed stars, like the ones that appear on the left-hand page of the Topkapi's frontispiece, are inscribed with the words that complete the picture. ذهبه, illuminated by Muhammad bin Uthman bin al-Hussein al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi, غفر الله له. I know you're all wondering how this folio reached the auctions. I don't know. And what's even worse is that we don't know where the folio is now, because according to Sotheby's, the buyer of this folio wants to keep his or her identity hidden. So Sotheby's folio provides us with an important piece of information. The son of Uthman was involved in the illumination of the Qur'an. But was he involved in the illumination of the 8th volume only? And if so, what was the role of his father, Uthman, which according to the verso of the colophon was the copyist and illuminator? The name of Muhammad is repeated again in small octagon with an illuminated panel and is preceded by Amal, the work of, confirming further the involvement of Muhammad in its illumination. A third name appears in this volume, Ali, at the bottom of an illuminated marginal device. It says Amal Ali, the work of Ali. We don't know who this Ali is, but the fact that his name is included in this minute manner suggests perhaps that he was, alongside Muhammad, involved in the illumination of the Qur'an, and perhaps specifically only in its marginal devices. Uthman's name appeared in another Qur'an, which is now in the Imam Riza Shrine Library in Mashhad. This Qur'an has a similar size to the Qur'an of Sultan Ibrahim, a bit bigger than an A4 size. It is 30 by 25 centimeters, and Sultan Ibrahim is 34 by 24.5 centimeters. They are copied in identical New Style script and have the same majestic feel with very similar illumination. The name of Uthman appears several times in this 30-volume Qur'an. The most elaborate occurrence is in the colophon of the 5th volume, which reads, كتبه وذهبه, copied and illuminated by Uthman bin al-Hussein bin Abi Sahl al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi, غفر الله له ولوالديه ولجميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات والفراغ منه في سنة 64 و400. It was brought forth in the year 464 or 1071 Common Era. Interestingly, Uthman's son, Muhammad, also copied and illuminated a section of this Qur'an, as indicated at the end of the 23rd volume. كتبه, I'm very sorry for the bad quality of these slides. كتبه, which is on the right-hand page in a different script. وذهبه, copied and gilded by Muhammad bin Uthman bin al-Hussein al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi. غفر الله له ولوالديه ولأسلافه ولجميع أمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Hence, each father and son copied and illuminated a volume in this Qur'an. But in Sultan Ibrahim's Qur'an, since the name of Muhammad is integrated in the illumination in small size, suggests that perhaps his role was secondary to his father's, who may have been the one responsible for the project. The patron of this Qur'an is mentioned at the end of its 10th volume. أمر بكتبة هذا المصحف, the writing of this Qur'an was ordered by الشيخ الرئيس السيد أبو جعفر محمد بن أحمد العبدوسي أطال الله في العز الدولة الدائمة etc. في شهور سنة 66 و400 in the month of the year 466. Note the formula أمر بكتبتي or أمر بكتبته was also used in the Qur'an of Sultan Ibrahim instead of the more commonly used الفراغ منه, finish the copying of, or كتبه, copied it. Here the term أمر بكتبته implies it was copied at the request of Al-Abdusi. The patron of the Qur'an might be the same Abu Ja'far Muhammad mentioned by Ibn Funduq and the historian al-Bayhaqi, who was the Naqib, chief, and Ra'is, the local mayor of Tus, a district in Khurasan that is very close to Mashhad. He was appointed by Sultan Mas'ud I, who's the father of Sultan Ibrahim, and was praised in the poetry of Al-Tha'alibi. According to the colophons that appear at the end of a number of volumes, the Qur'an was completed in about 4 years, between 462 and 466. And given that the illumination and script are meticulously executed in both Qur'ans, we can assume that Sultan Ibrahim's Qur'an took as long, if not more, to be completed, especially that it contains Persian translation. Now let us have a closer look at the methods of production in these two manuscripts. So there's an obvious attention to layout on the macro and micro level in both Qur'ans. For example, in Sultan Ibrahim's Qur'an, each line of large new style script used for Qur'anic text equals 3 lines of the smaller new style used for the Persian translations. Similarly, each line of large round style used for hadith, poetry, and dua equals 3 lines of the smaller script. The lines on the right-hand pages are horizontally aligned with the lines on the left-hand pages, indicating that each spread was conceived and ruled at once. A balanced and consistent layout based on a grid of 19 lines was achieved from the beginning to the end of the volume, with different types of scripts coexisting in harmony. In addition to this macro level, the way the letters are laid out within one line indicate that each line was meticulously studied. So for example, on the same spread, on the left-hand page, the bows of the letters Nun intersect in a harmonious way, indicating a level of artistry and minute planning. The analysis of a number of folios from both these Ghaznavid manuscripts indicates that a collaborative attitude was present during their production and that planning had happened in advance before copying. A closer look reveals that the large Qur'anic text was copied before the small scripts as illustrated on these folios. Notice on the folio to the right, the 2 lines of small script at the bottom that fit in the negative space created by 2 lines of large script, and in between the ascenders of the last line. Similarly, the folio on the left shows how the small script could not have been positioned in this way had the large script not been executed first. The same folio on the left illustrates how the large verse marker medallions were executed after the large Qur'anic text was copied and before the small Persian text. The small rosettes marking the end of each Persian sentence were executed in the spaces left empty in advance. The folio on the right demonstrates how the background illumination was executed last due to the way the decoration frames the text, medallions, dots, and vowels. Finally, the illuminated borders framing the text were executed at the end after copying was completed, as seen on the folio to the right. At the bottom, you see the frame going over the text, and on these folios from the Qur'an of Al-Abdusi, where the frame goes over a letter at the end of the first lines, or here the frames goes around the bowls of noons of the last lines. These various stages of copying and elimination indicate that a plan had to be devised in advance, and that there might have been someone responsible for the whole project and the completion of each of its phases. If this were the case, then it may well have been Uthman who signed Sultan Ibrahim's Qur'an as its copyist and illuminator. Uthman holds the title of Al-Warraq, indicating that he was in the profession of wiraqa. The word comes from waraq, paper. The title referred in different contexts to various aspects related to the production of books, from their copying to their selling. So, for example, the Central Asian religious authority Al-Sam'ani, who died in 562, offers a definition of the warraq as someone who copied the Qur'an, hadith, and other texts, and in Baghdad as someone who manufactured and sold paper. A couple of centuries later, in his Muqaddimah, Ibn Khaldun associates the profession of wiraqa with copying, correcting, binding, and other related matters. It is therefore not far-fetched to think of Uthman al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi as someone whose knowledge covered all aspects of Qur'an production, or even as the supervisor on the production of both Qur'ans. In the colophon we just saw from Al-Abdusi's Qur'an, Uthman is named with his nisbah from Abu Sahl, his paternal grandfather, who is Abu Sahl al-Warraq Muhammad al-Zuzani, mentioned by the traditionist Al-Hakim al-Nishapuri in his biographical history of religious authorities in Nishapur. Hence, the grandfather of Uthman was a alim and a warraq, a profession that Uthman had inherited and passed on to his son Muhammad, suggesting that the training of a warraq may have been passed on from father to son. There is no doubt, really, there is no doubt that Uthman bin Hussein al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi was a skilled calligrapher and illuminator, and these are spread from Sultan Ibrahim's Qur'an, where he displays his skill, his knowledge of various scripts by using 4 different types of scripts, including Kufic, on one spread, similar to a great master's calligraphic exercise sheet. For purely aesthetic reasons, Uthman here emphasized the letters at the beginning of Surah Maryam by copying them in the same size and new style script as the Basmala, and balancing them as a word by extending the kaf to the right and the sad to the left, keeping the 3 headed letters at the center. These are only 2 examples among many others that confirm Uthman's artistry and attention to details. But to what extent Uthman's visual repertoire employed in these 2 Qur'ans was new? To what degree can we talk about a school of script and illumination established by him? Of course, the illumination and script employed in Sultan Ibrahim's Qur'an and that of Al-Abdusi fit in the development of Qur'anic script and illumination, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Nevertheless, he succeeded in developing a distinct visual repertoire by drawing on a local visual language. I will not get into many details here, but I'll show you a few elements that appear to be new and others that place these 2 Qur'ans within the historical continuum of Qur'an production in the Mashriq. Based on the surviving corpus of Qur'ans from the 10th and 11th centuries, the new style scripts have been already in use in Qur'ans and throughout the Islamic world. But here, with Uthman bin Hussein al-Warraq, the scripts reached a level of maturity and stylizations not seen before. In comparison to the new style script employed in the Qur'an copied by Ali ibn Shadan al-Razi in 361, Uthman's script is characterized by high contrast between thick and thin strokes, a majestic feel with long ascenders and descenders. Nevertheless, Uthman laid out some letters within words similarly to Ibn Shadan, We're talking about a 100-year difference here. Letters are extended and placed above one another, creating parallel lines in coherence, as seen in the way ya is extended backwards, below the letters of the previous word, forming small V-shapes. Such gestures place the work of Uthman in the historical development of script and layout stylization. On the level of illumination, the two Ghaznavid Qur'ans employ a visual language that is also rooted in previous centuries, but that has nevertheless a local touch. The elements that constitute the illumination of these two Qur'ans, from their frontispieces to their minute devices, such as the verse markers and vignettes, are based on older motifs employed in Qur'ans from previous centuries. For example, the vignettes that extend from their illuminated headings, which are shown at the top of this slide, so extended from the headings and panels, are circular in form in both Ghaznavid Qur'ans. They are decorated with symmetrically designed interlaced tendrils with a polylobed blue contour and have an outer frame made of a repetition of floral buds or scrolls and two sinuous thin lines extending from their contour. When assessed against vignettes in Qur'ans up until used in Qur'ans up until the 4th century, the design of these vignettes is a mix between two types. They have a circular form like type 5 vignette, following the typology of Professor De Roche here, but their design is taken from that of type 4, since they contain foliated scrolls. Thus, the design of the vignettes in the Ghaznavid Qur'ans is based on an older type of vignettes used in Kufic Qur'ans, but is yet a clear departure from it. The polylobed contour with the sinuous line extensions and symmetrically designed tendrils is a design absent from older Qur'ans. Another element that distinguishes the visual repertoire of Uthman bin Hussein al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi is the Fleur-De-Lys, which is made of a pointed body with 2 leaves and 2 sepals at the bottom, one on each side. It appears similarly stylized on a marble arched panel from the 11th or 12th century excavated in Ghazna. The panel is adorned with scrolls of Fleur-De-Lys that have 2 sepals, 2 leaves, and a long extended sinuous tip that curves at the end, stylized in the same manner as the ones decorating the text ground in Sultan Ibrahim's Qur'an. This is only one example among many others that draw parallels between the decorative motifs in these Ghaznavid Qur'ans and those on the remains of Ghaznavid architecture. Hence, the visual repertoire of these two Imperial Ghaznavid Qur'ans is rooted in earlier traditions, but also present local elements that appear to be part of a local visual trend that Uthman, Muhammad, and Ali had articulated in their work. 3 additional Qur'ans can be added to this group, even more, but these share many characteristics with the 2 Ghaznavid Qur'ans I showed you today. So here they are listed in a table. I don't have enough time to discuss them, but they seem to be dispersed among various collections, and they're very similar to the 2 Ghaznavid Qur'ans that I just discussed. Uthman must have been renowned in the sphere of Qur'anic production, since forgery with his name survive today with much lesser quality, as Professor De Roche also suggested. This folio at the end of a Qur'an, now in a private collection, attributes it to Uthman bin al-Hussein al-Warraq, pointing to his fame and perhaps to the success of his style. In fact, I was able to trace this visual repertoire in Qur'ans produced a century later. As an example, in the Ghurid Qur'an, which Barry Flood had studied and generously provided me with reproductions, the stylized Fleur-De-Lys and the typical vignettes with the polylobed contours and 2 sinuous lines, among other features that characterize the Ghaznavid Qur'ans, are present here. The Qur'an was copied in 584 for the 5th Ghurid Sultan Ghiyath ad-Din ibn Sham, who ruled between 558 and 599, in an important city in the western part of the Sultanate, since the eastern part was ruled by his brother Mu'azz ad-Din. This Qur'an is hence evidence to the continuity and success of the style of al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi almost a century later. The 5 Imperial Ghaznavid Qur'ans must have left a powerful visual impact due to their rich illumination, excessive use of gold, and monumental stylized scripts. Their visual language belonged to a wider network of artistic production, which I have only partially highlighted today. These lavishly illuminated Qur'ans indicate that just as they were great patrons of architecture, the Ghaznavid elite were also great patrons of the book, with an interest in projecting the image of a strong dynasty, supported by the Abbasids and competing at times with the Seljuks. It was through their patronage of the arts that the Ghaznavid rulers sought to communicate a radiant image of their empire, which was reinforced by Persian poets recruited to write and recite panegyric poems. It was through the distinct visual language of Uthman al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi that the Ghaznavids are remembered today. On February 2nd, 2012, the director of the Topkapi Museum, Dr. İlber Ortaylı, and the Turkish ambassador to Tehran, Umit Yardım, joined an orchestrated ceremony to offer a facsimile edition of the 8th volume of Sultan Ibrahim's Qur'an to the library of the Islamic Consultative Assembly, Majlis Shura al-Islami, in Tehran. It was the first time that Topkapi offers a manuscript to Iran's Majlis Library. The ceremony before Parliament was widely publicized in Turkish and Iranian media. Leading politicians, religious scholars, and academics attended the occasion. As reported in the press, the timing of the ceremony was intentionally designed to fall on 12 Rabi' al-Awwal, the traditional date for the celebration of the birth of the Prophet, al-Mawlid al-Nabawi. The gift carried with it both political and religious significance. Two themes were foregrounded in the ceremony: the sacred art of Quranic calligraphy and the early practice of translating the Qur'an into Persian. But when the Iranian Speaker of Parliament, Ali Larijani, addressed the assembly, he described the Qur'an as a force capable of drawing together Muslims separated by sectarian differences. This statement reflected the political act that aimed at symbolically bringing together the Sunnis of Turkey and the Shia of Iran behind the Ghaznavid Qur'an of Sultan Ibrahim. So this is how Uthman bin Hussein al-Warraq, his son Muhammad, and Ali's work was transformed from conveying a distinct and powerful image of the Ghaznavid dynasty to another political tool aiming at positioning the Turkish state as the political and cultural power in the region, capable of uniting the Ummah behind it. It was again transformed when one of its folios entered the art market, when it became a commodity, an object with monetary value. The folio that holds the signature of Muhammad, Uthman's son, was estimated between 4,000 and 6,000 British pounds. It was sold for £24,000, almost $30,000. That's what one folio from al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi's work is worth in the art market today. To end on a more general note, nevertheless an important one to our understanding of the Qur'an, the work of Uthman, Muhammad, and Ali was perceived as an Imperial Ghaznavid artistic production at its time of production. Today, when it appeared at Sotheby's, it was also perceived as a luxurious artifact. But what do we know about how people dealt with it between these 2 points of time? What do we know about the biographies of these manuscripts? How were these Quranic manuscripts appropriated during their journey from Ghazna to Istanbul and London? What layers of meanings did they gain during their circulation and dispersion? Can we retrace their journeys through marks on their pages? We know that Sultan Ibrahim's Qur'an was endowed at some point in its lifetime, as indicated by the waqf at the top of this spread, but we do not know where, when, or how people used it. Another sign in this Qur'an gives us some hints about its journey. A later hand had gone through the whole manuscript, smudging the names of several early companions of the Prophet: Abu Huraira, Abu Bakr, and Uthman. The smudging of these names might be a reflection of the practice of cursing the early companions, Sabb al-Sahaba, indicating a reader with Shiite sympathies and suggesting that at some point during its journey west, the manuscript passed through an area and period with a large Shiite population, such as Safavid Iran, and which had even led to the altering of Uthman's name in the colophon to read as Ali. These signs tell us about how people perceived, used, and interacted with the Qur'an, not only as a holy text, but also as an object, as an artifact, and perhaps as the work of al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi. It is through its circulation that the work of Uthman, Muhammad, and Ali had gained different meanings, and it is through these layers of meanings that the legacy of Al-Warraq al-Ghaznawi is still alive today. Thank you. I lost my voice.